My name is Ivo Klaassen. I'm the head of the veterinary medicines division here at the agency. And with my co-chair, Constance McDaniel from the BVL in Germany, we've prepared this session. We've had meetings with the speakers. And I would like to bring up a few slides briefly explaining how we are proposing to run this meeting. Sorry. Maybe it's better that you're not here, Rick. It's quite hot in the room. It's going to get hotter even. I'd like to start a bit by setting the scene very briefly. Then we will listen to a series of presentations, starting with presentation giving the veterinarian's perspective on shortages and availability issues from Federation of Veterinarians in Europe. Nancy will do that. Then we got two presentations giving us the industry's perspective and two presentations giving us the regulator's perspective. Then we have already put a few topics on where we would like to have discussions, and then we will conclude with actions, if we agree on actions, but at least with the conclusions of this breakout session. Janos, who's sitting opposite, will keep track of what we discuss here, and he will report back tomorrow in plenary on this session. And already from Rick's intervention, I think we earlier in the meeting, we all know that shortages on the veterinary side are different from shortages on the human side. So it's not a copy-paste exercise in that sense. What are the session objectives of today? I think one of the first things that I would like to do, and I've got a slide on that as well, is look at what are we discussing here? Is it lack of availability versus shortage? And for that, we will introduce the definitions of availability and shortages. I'd like to have some discussion on identifying the root causes of lack of availability and shortages of veterinary medicinal products. Discuss the specific issues with lack of availability or shortages of VMP. I don't think we can move away from the regulation 2096. How does it support the availability of VMPs, and what is in there in terms of provisions of looking at shortages? And then last but not least, I think we need to discuss that in order to manage availability or shortage of VMPs, we need to identify whether actions are needed. And then if we agree that actions are needed, what are actions that we would need to invest in, but also what are actions that we would like to avoid. So let's not try and set up a system that will not bring us any benefit. This is the proposal that we have from our side, but obviously happy to take on any topics that may pop up. If you can go to the next slide, please. And Sylvia, can you move because that's on top of my, yeah? Okay, now so why have we brought up lack of availability versus shortages? The definition, and thank you, Janos, for putting this in the slide. The definition of a lack of availability is of a lack of products that are authorized but are not marketed or no longer marketed. And a shortage is a lack of products that are authorized and marketed, but where there are supply chain disruptions that directly prevent the availability of authorized and marketed products. And that may be limited to certain markets, smaller member states, for example, or it may apply to particular types of products and then in the whole of Europe. And that's, of course, when we see that there's a huge gap between the demand for a particular product and the supply of a particular product, then we would define that as a shortage. So let's see if we need it further in the discussions to discriminate whether we're discussing a lack of availability or a shortage per se. Personally, I would say that if a certain medicinal product is not available in a single veterinary practice, that's not a shortage. That's an availability issue, and the shortage is indeed, supply chain disruptions, etc. Then for the discussion, and we can bring back those slides later on if we have the discussion, for the discussion on is the, and I've seen in the slides of the presenters that it will be brought up as well, is the new regulation creating provisions for managing shortages? Is it, what is in there? We found two articles in the regulation. We all know that one of the objectives of the regulation is indeed to increase the availability of veterinary medicinal products in Europe. So it's creating a market where it should be easy to access veterinary medicinal products, irrespective of where you as a veterinarian are using it. That was the idea. But there are two articles that we found that deal with availability directly. This is Article 58, paragraph 2, which is actually an obligation. It's a shall provision. Marketing authorization holder shall, within the limits of its responsibilities, ensure appropriate and continued supply of its veterinary medicinal products. Now, we can go into the discussion on what it really means in terms of regulatory interpretation, but this does not take into account necessarily the needs for specific products. However, Article 101, paragraph 4 is more clear on that. A wholesale distributor shall, within the limits of their responsibility, ensure appropriate and continued supply of veterinary medicinal products to persons authorized to supply it in accordance with Article 103, so that the needs for animal health in the relevant member states are covered. And this brings in the element of a need for particular markets for dealing with animal health. So basically a demand from the side of veterinarians or animal owners for specific products. And then, since it is a shall provision, also the obligation for marketing authorization holders, wholesale distributors, to supply that market. There is, I think we need to say that there is no mandatory reporting of supply chain issues or of shortages. But we have in the UPD, we have included the field where availability should be indicated, basically indicating for the marketing authorization holder to indicate whether a particular product at the package level even is available for a particular market. So with that kickoff, I would say, I think I would like to first open the floor if there's anyone who would like to add anything to, so if we go back to the slide, sorry, Sylvia, that I mess up your presentation. Go back up to the slide, now the next slide, I think, which is on the session's objective. If there's anyone who feels that there's anything missing or would like to change anything here. I'm looking in the room, online. So I take Rick, please.
Yes, thank you, Ivo. I didn't have a comment on the session objectives, but I did note in the definitions that your definition of availability does not cover therapeutic gaps. I mean, that might be correct of you to put it like that, but certainly historically, whenever we've been discussing availability, it has often been because there is no product, not even authorized.
Fair point, but I think that's an area that Janos, do you want to comment on this? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Ivo. This comes from the availability task force. When they started working, the task force is for availability of authorized medicines. And when they started thinking of availability and shortage, in the documents, they mentioned that for this definition reflects how they work, and it is mentioned also in their guidelines. So, of course, there can be different definitions. Now, with the extended mandate regulation, there is a new definition came, and now we just heard this morning that the definition will be further discussed under the joint action, and it will come back to the task force or the spoke working party for approval, because the spoke working party has all the member states represented. So I just wanted to mention that this comes from the task force, and this definition reflects the terms of the reference of the HMA availability task force. But yes, there can be other definitions as well. Thank you.
Yeah, please, Paul.
Very quick. What Rick is referring to is more what we call therapeutic gaps, and it's something we work on, but it's it's overlapping shortages, but it's another topic to work on. So we call this therapeutic gaps, and we don't manage this as same way as shortages.
Oh, thanks for that, Paul. No, Rick, I recognize that therapeutic gaps is not in the definition, but I also would suggest that we try to stay away from that discussion, because I think we've got quite enough to discuss if we focus on the areas at hand. But it's certainly something that will need to be discussed, because but it's another area of where we expect, obviously, the regulation to deliver. Can you live with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Then, if nothing else, no. Okay, then I suggest we start with the first presentation, which is from Federation of Veterinarians in Europe. And for that, I would like to give the floor to Nancy de Brin, who is the Executive Director of the Federation of Veterinarians in Europe. And she's with us in the room. And Nancy, please go ahead.
So first of all, I want to thank EMA for organizing this workshop, because this more and more becomes also a very important issue in veterinary medicine. So yeah, thank you very much. And we're a small group, so I think that's very positive. We know each other well. So that's maybe also easier to find solutions. The next slide is just about FE, and I think I can skip that, because I think everybody knows FE, and everybody also knows our strategy, so you can skip that one also. So we go immediately a couple of slides further and to the topic of the day, namely of availability and versus shortages. And this was already mentioned before by Ivo. As FE, we did a survey to our members in December, and we did it again. We repeated it again in February, and we asked them specifically, what are the shortages you have at this moment in your country of veterinary medicines? And what we saw is that we got a combination of both shortages but also availability problems back, because for practitioners, they just interpreted it as I'm short of, I don't have this product. And usually they had it before, but it could be that it was taken from the market, that it was temporarily available, or in some cases that they know it existed, but they didn't have it on their market. So it was a combination and really an interlink between the two. So when we looked at what we got back, and we really got a lot of response from our members, we send out a lot of surveys. We don't always get a lot of response. So this really showed how important this topic was from them. We really got whole lists of products they were missing in their countries. And just counting the products, we saw that most of them were antibiotics. So 23% were antibiotics. And mostly these were narrow spectrum antibiotics. And then followed the vaccines. 20% were livestock vaccines, 17% were vaccines for feline, for cats, 10% for equine, for horses, 6% were NSAIDs. So and we don't have a lot of NSAIDs for animals. And 8% were other products. And these were products like atropine, vitamin B, and so on. So if you go to the next slide, this is just, yeah, you can't read it, but you see a very long list of products, and you can press again. And important to see about that, some of these products were the same in different countries. So there were a shortage in different countries, but other ones they had in one country and not in the neighboring country. So some of them overlapped, others didn't overlap at all. Now, there were quite a few, what I would call critical or essential ones, and they are different, like what they told about critical for healthcare crises. They are just critical in peacetime. And there, for example, we had several vaccines that were reported, like rabies vaccines. And yeah, that's really critical. Can have big public health issues if you don't have them. The same, for example, salmonella vaccines were another one. Anthrax vaccines were another one that were reported. So quite a few vaccines that really have a public health implication. And then, of course, a lot of vaccines that are less important for public health, but are still very important for animal health, like all the feline and the canine vaccines. On antibiotics, like I said before, there what we saw especially were the narrow spectrum antibiotics. And this is tetracyclines, penicillins were the ones that came back the most. And this is very, yeah, very regrettable, because of course we want veterinarians to use narrow spectrum antibiotics, and if they don't have them available, they have to go to higher classes in the AMEC classification. So that's really not what we want. So next, we also asked them, if you are short of a medicine or a vaccine, is it easy to get reliable information? And there, the biggest answer was sometimes. In some cases, they could get the information, but in other cases, they found it very difficult to find the right information, and both on what was the cause of the shortage or the lack of availability, or what was the duration it was going to take. And we had also some countries that said, no, we cannot, it's very difficult for us, we don't get it. And then we also had some positive answers from some countries. So if you do the next one, then the next question we asked was, if you are short of a medicine or a vaccine, can you easily source them from another country? And there the majority said no. It's not easy at all. It takes a long time. It's quite bureaucratic. Sometimes it costs, there's also extra cost. And only few countries said, yes, it is quite easy. And for example, one of them, I didn't put names here, but for that one, is a positive one, is Luxembourg. Luxembourg said, yeah, because we very closely work together with Belgium, with France, with all our neighboring countries. So there are examples where it is possible. So the next slide. Now, we also had a look at which countries have shortages overviews. And recently CMDV, I think, published, or email, one of the two, published a whole nice overview, but I think it was only last week or something after we had done our analysis, but that was really nice. So we had a look into it, and there are some countries, but it's only a few that do it. And so, for example, in Slovenia has it, and it reminds me a little bit of a blockchain that they have, because they each time add just to the same spreadsheet the new entry, which is, of course, it works perfectly. So it shows which are the new products on the market, which products stop commercialization. And I think this is one of the problems. We see products going away from the market, our availability is already very low, and we see quite a few products stopping the commercialization on markets. Then it also shows when a product goes back on the market after a shortage, and it also shows what products that have a shortage and the expected duration. So a quite nice overview. So another, yes, you can go to the next one. The next example we had is Belgium. So there also they have a nice overview of the unavailable medicines, the medicines that become available again, and the new medicines. And you go to the next one. And there you see, again, the whole list that they had. This was taken, I think, about a week ago, 10 days ago. And again, we see that half of the list is a shortage problem, but the other half of the list is the stop of the commercialization of the product. Again, so next one is Denmark. Also, again, has a nice list, is a little bit less elaborate. Next one. And then I wanted to add, and I just included this now, is France. And France is really a nice example because they also have a nice list. But then if you go click on the different products, you see, yeah, the next one, you click, yeah, then you see what is the product that has a shortage. You don't see what is the reason in brief terms when it's expected to the market, but the only countries I found that also has alternatives, suggested alternatives. So if this product is not available, the other products available are this, this, and this, and this. And this, I think France, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm the only country I found that has that really nice. And I think for practitioners, this is really useful because if they then have a shortage, they know what to turn to. So there are some more countries, but I didn't include them here. So just to end up, I think we need to better monitor and forecast availability and shortages. And this is especially crucial for limited market. I've seen that some of our members from from smaller countries are available, and they will be able to say you what the impact is really in the field. I know before the new medicines legislation was started, the draft proposal there was a study from a consortium for the Commission, and they looked at a number of products on the market in different member states. And you had member states that had more than 1,000 veterinary products on the market, and you had member states where there were only like 50. I've never seen this exercise repeated, but it would be interesting to see how it has evolved over the years. So it is important to monitor the lack of availability, and there goes back to the therapeutic gaps also. I think the essential medicines, what are the diseases we have, what are the authorized medicines we have, and what are the therapeutic gaps we have. And we need to do it in a One Health way, because if I hear talking in the earlier about essential lists, they always think about human medicine, but many of these medicines are also important in the veterinary field. And if they restrict them only to the human field, because often they're not even, I think, aware that we also need them in the veterinary field, that's really a worry. So next slide. Yeah, it was earlier said by Ivo before, one of the main aims of the new regulation is to increase availability of veterinary medicinal products and improve the functioning of the internal market. Are we reaching that? Is that happening? I think we really would be good to have some indicators to measure it, because if I ask our members, they're not convinced it's happening. So last slides, I think, takeaway. So we definitely have also a shortage problem on the veterinary side, but it's less than on the human side. And our biggest problem is availability. We have essential products that we're missing, especially in some countries, and when there's shortage, of course, then the situation gets more worse, and we have to monitor it better. Next, so very last slide. What can we do? How can we make a real difference? Well, we think, first of all, we need to have better communication towards practitioners on shortages, but also on alternatives. And indeed, UPD could help with that in the future. Not yet. It doesn't set the availability status yet, but it could be there a help. We need also enhanced collaboration, I believe, between veterinary associations, competent authorities, and the industry. And on an EU level would be good, but it is also necessary on a national level, because as seen in this list, often these shortages, they're not the same in all countries. So it will be necessary at the national level, and also to facilitate, for example, getting the product from another member state. It has to be also on the national level. On an EU level, I think one of the things that would really help is to have veterinary representatives already in the SPOC network. I know some of our contacts, our members reached out to SPOC representatives, and then they got the message, yeah, we only deal with human medicine. So there, it would be nice to also have some veterinary representatives. And we need to see that the regulation reaches its goal. Just on what have been said before, I think when we have an availability problem or a shortage, regulatory flexibility can help there, because otherwise, yeah, we really have a problem, and it can be a public health risk. And another thing is maybe equitable access also in different member states. So if there is not enough products, at least to have, yeah, a reasonable distribution between the member states, that it not only goes to a few member states, but also to these smaller countries. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Nancy, for that presentation. It's very good to hear the perspective of where it really matters, is which at the level of the veterinarians and the animal owners, and where the access is important. Before we continue with the next presentation, I would like to give the opportunity to ask if there's people that have direct questions that they want to be answered right now. Thomas posted the question.
Well, actually, it was not really a question, but a statement. Thank you so much, Ivo. It's all about publishing information on shortages, not that easy, which we learned on a national level, because what we need is, of course, some kind of delegation to publish these data. And sometimes it's not possible to publish these data because these delegations are missing. And of course, if something, especially if we're going to recommend any alternatives, this might also be seen as critical from our lawyer's point of view, because in this case, we're going to direct something into a direction of a probably competing pharmaceutical manufacturer. So this is something that's got to be checked, of course, from a legal point of view. And we also, of course, wish to do something like this in the future, but it's not that easy sometimes.
No, thank you very much, Thomas, for that. And that brings the question: are we creating shortages if we communicate shortages? Because what happens, obviously, when we communicate that there are shortages in certain areas, other people may start stockpiling medicines, and that in and by itself may create shortages. If I look at the presentation of you, Nancy, what I take home is that there are country-specific shortages, that there's different ways of communicating in different member states. Some of them I mean, a lot of member states do not communicate this at all. They don't see it as a task, but France was given as a very good example because it provides also those alternatives if there is a shortage of a particular product. So communication of shortages is important. And you mentioned regulatory flexibility, but also the list of critical VMPs, which I think is something that we could work on jointly. I've got one question, which is related to slide number 6 in your presentation, and because I've been going through all the presentations, and I think all the presentations that we will listen to today are really excellent and very good to get a discussion going. This particular slide, I see this as a qualitative slide, not necessarily as a quantitative slide. I don't think you can draw conclusions on shortages or levels of shortages per se, and for that, and we will see it in presentations later. We should do some sort of data gathering at some point in time to get an understanding of, are we looking at, for example, 90% of the supply is okay for antimicrobials, but we're missing 10%, we cannot treat those animals, and for vaccines, is it 50% versus, we have no clue what the actual shortage here is. And this is, I think, what you have gotten back in responses of member states or members that report, and then you've looked at the 100% of the replies and then say, this is what. So what this tells us is that a lot of veterinarians are experiencing shortages, but not necessarily whether they whether that's 90% of the market or 10% of the market. Is that the correct interpretation? Yeah.
That's absolutely correct. Yes.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Nancy? Rick, please.
Thank you very much, Ivo, and thank you, Nancy, for your presentation. Actually, I think that discussion just there has pretty much answered my question or my query. I did have a slightly cheeky question, Nancy, but as you said, we all know each other very well. I saw an earlier version of your presentation where you had the number of replies in some of your pie charts, and those added up to 14. And yet on an earlier slide, you have 300,000 members. So I was wondering whether that has some sort of reflection on the urgency of this issue.
It's not a serious question, Rick.
It's not a serious question. What I would like to say, Ivo, if I may, I would like to come back in the discussion. I see we have 60 minutes of discussion to Nancy's slides on the different databases, because I think they are quite useful to look at. And I would like to ask Nancy, when we have more time, on which bits of information there are the most useful. Thank you.
Just to answer, Rick, we didn't ask the 300,000 veterinarians. We asked our members only. So these were, and in total, we had 22 countries that replied and 3 species organizations. Yeah, and they collected, of course, from there.
And the question on what you found most useful in the reporting on the shortages?
Well, I think, yeah, the ANSES database was really the most elaborate, and because in many countries, practitioners rely on the information given by the industry itself. So the marketing authorization holder has a shortage, and then they report it to the practitioner. And then what we hear is that they mostly recommend products from their own company, while if it's from the competent authority, I think what they do is they look, okay, there's this vaccine for equine influenza is missing, but these other companies also have vaccines for equine influenza. So then you just list all the others. So it's more, I think, neutral. And that maybe also answers a little bit the question of that Thomas has, can we do that? Well, it's just looking at what is available, authorized in your country for the same condition. So I don't think you're having any privacy issues there.
Thank you. I see.
Ivo,
Yes, please, Rick.
yeah, I did say I was happy to come back on this in the discussion, but we're having the discussion now. And I've noted the Slovenia and the France examples were perhaps the most useful. And I've noted that when these databases note that something is no longer commercialized, that's obviously very useful information because you don't have to be looking for it anymore. But on a couple of the other databases, I wasn't quite sure whether that information was the rest of the information was entirely useful. So if we looked at the Belgian one, which is on the screen now, if I cast my eye down those that are temporarily unavailable and we look at the periods, they are 1 month, 1 month, 4 months, 6 months, 2 months, and 1 month. And I presume this is interruptions in manufacturing. I'm not entirely sure. But my thought was, well, that's not particularly useful because it doesn't necessarily translate into a shortage in the marketplace. Certainly an interruption of 1 month is unlikely to. Maybe an interruption of 6 months could. So this was the sort of discussion I was perhaps looking to a bit later. In the Denmark one, there was an interruption of 9 months, but then there's an interruption of 6 weeks, and a couple of months. So again, I don't know whether that itself is that useful to you. And I think this would be something interesting to discuss later.
Nancy.
Well, it might have a big impact for fast-growing species like broilers, for example. They have very, very rigid vaccination schemes, and they don't live very long. So you have to vaccinate them on very precise time. So even there, a short disruption of 2 weeks, if you don't have the vaccines available, it might have huge consequences.
Yeah, and that's one example. The other example that I would think of is, for example, recently discussed Distamink, which is a vaccine for mink, which is a seasonal vaccine, which you have to use in a certain period in parent stock to protect the offspring. If it's not available within the 2 months before you actually where you can do that vaccination program, then it's a lost opportunity, and you're left with unprotected animals. So I recognize that as well. I've had Elsa here in the room that also wanted to say something or ask a question. So Elsa, please.
Thank you, Ivo, and thank you, Nancy, for the presentation and all the comments. When putting everything together, maybe we are jumping into the discussion a bit premature, but I think this is bringing added value to this veterinary session. So I am thinking of the first question from the availability definition and the fact that you were not considering, or at least in the definition provided in the presentation, the unmet therapeutic needs were a bit out of the scope, which was really not our interpretation. So as a departing point, we were making more of a global considerations in our presentation. But do I understand correctly, Nancy, that in the end, leaving shortage apart, availability, you would consider that it's a specific product with a name and from a trademark that has ceased to be on the market, right? That would be availability. But you may have other therapeutic options available, other medicines that could be replacing, the vet could be using to replace this need? When you are thinking of availability problem, is that the product is not on the market, it was produced, but there could be other options for this product, right?
It can be both. So sometimes there's really no product on the
Yeah.
market for a certain indication. In other cases, indeed, there's a product. There
Okay.
was a product on the market, but it's taken off the
Okay.
market.
So
or-
the survey is really on products that have ceased to be on the market.
No, the survey was actually really on shortages.
Okay.
But the answers we got back most were shortages, but some were also lack availability.
Okay. Okay.
Probably due to stop of commercialization, most of them.
Because then I'm thinking, and we will talk about the UPD for sure, and the public portal. And I have to say, we didn't consider this in our presentation. And perhaps indeed going through commercial presentations as alternatives is going too far as a starting point, but the API, for instance, or indication if you have a good search engine for the vet. So I don't know, be a possible solution if there are a number of alternative products there, and easy and straightforward.
Yeah, I think one of the what would help if is you could search, but this of course is not yet the case, but is on indication, of course, that you say a species and an indication in the UPD, and then practitioner could more easily find an alternative product. But that is not yet the case. And the other thing is, if you have to get it from another country, it's difficult for most practitioners. So I think there we have to further work on facilitating the single market.
Thank you. It was more a clarification because I think we will get back to UPD afterwards, but to understand better where your questioner was focusing on. Thank you.
For sure, we will get back. Janos, you wanted to say something, and then I close the discussion here. Or was supposed to have 2 questions, but it's good to have a discussion already. Please.
It will be quick. Regarding Nancy's comment that the spoke working part, it would be good that if the spoke working party had veterinary representatives. I can confirm that almost all member states have a veterinary representative in this working party. So I know that there are still missing, but just a few. So. And another one is regarding the communication on shortages, whether it trigger stockpiling. It is recognized by the thematic working group too on communication, and they try to find a method, a way of wording to handle this. Because I'm just giving the feedback from this thematic working group, because they said it's this morning. They said that. It cannot be the reason for not give information that it might trigger stockpiling. So the working group has the opinion that a proper wording needs to be found to avoid this as much as possible.
Good luck with that. You can tell that this is the first time that we bring all the stakeholders together and have a discussion on shortages and availability, because it triggers, good discussions, and it's not a repetition of earlier meetings, which I think is good. I would like to move on now to giving I think the next is the industry the floor, and for that, ladies first. So Elsa, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Ivo. So yes, more formally, a note of thanks also to EMA and the HMA for organizing this workshop. Indeed, we can see already that there was a value for gathering together. So I didn't know what kind of an audience we would be having here today, but indeed it's the usual suspects. We know each other quite well, so I don't know if I shall introduce myself and the association, but I'm speaking on behalf of Access VetMed as a technical director, representing the generic and added value veterinary medicines industry. I will not give the details. The presentations will be online. And just to highlight that as a generic and interchangeability nature of generics, like giving extra therapeutic choices, we feel we have a big role in this discussion in increasing access and availability. Next one, please. So as an introductory note and in line with the mission statement, we recognize the importance of preventing and addressing any possible shortages in veterinary medicine. While preparing for this workshop, we had the opportunity to talk to some of you present here. And indeed, there was some conclusions that on the field, it is not always clear what the root cause of the problem may be. But we have, during this pre-discussion, already elaborated on shortages or availability. So I will not further elaborate on that. What I can confirm that from an industry side, and after talking to the members, of course, I needed the feedback of some companies to come prepared to this meeting. The conclusion is that availability is indeed the bigger problem and threat, and not that much shortages at the industry side. We perceive the increasing concerns from veterinarians and also some issues reported by the national competent authorities during these preparatory sessions, which were very helpful. And so we really embrace this workshop and the opportunity to exchange and understand each other better. So I hope we can further reflect and consider what we can do to prevent and eventually address the shortages on the veterinary medicine side. Also, during the workshop preparation, we were given an instruction that it would be helpful if we give a sign on our, if we could be inclined to have equivalent guidance, best practice guide as the one that is being elaborated at the human side. Our answer is not, and in the next slides, I will explain why. So next slide, please. So I will first give a very light perspective regarding the shortages on our sector. This is the feedback that I have been given by my members, not only for this meeting, but in the last 3-4 years, because due to the geopolitical factors, we have been asking the industry how things are going. So since COVID started, and for many reasons, we have to ask. So we can confirm indeed there were some unprecedented tensions on the medicine supply chain, including the veterinary medicines one, which was not immune, of course. But overall, the feedback is that it's been quite resilient as far as our members reported. So yes, there have been some unexpected problems in the supply chain, and yes, there were some delays in deliveries too, but we think we can state that we have been able to avoid major supply problems, both at the level of ingredients and also conditioning materials. I have to say that in the generic business, we don't deal with vaccines, so maybe it's a precision that is relevant for the veterinarians. And we can also confirm, luckily, that today we are not on the same page as human medicine sector. They seem to have a much more complex influencing factors, and the situation on the vet sector seems to be more in our hands as far as we have been reported. But we cannot make promises for the future, of course. The situation may change, and especially experience shows in other situations that what happens at human medicine sector sometimes is reflected on the vet side too in the future. We hope it will not be the case, but yeah, there's better be careful. So what is currently at risk regarding shortages? I've been reported that what is the equation between compliance versus economics is an increasing threat and is already impacting and reducing pharmaceutical industry portfolios. Compliance is reported to be sometimes so high that it is not justified to continue economically with a product. And compliance here, I'm not talking about the regulation. This is not the regulation 2019, but it's more about compliance versus suppliers, so inspection to suppliers or GMP requirements, etc. So this is becoming increasingly hard. And as a consequence, for some medicines that are considered critical for some companies. Sorry, Sylvia, I didn't say that it's the next slide. I was already. Yeah. So for the products that are being considered critical by some marketing authorization holders, they cannot rely on one supplier only. So what they do is that they would add another supplier on top. So as such, they have a second source assured for the supply. Because changing from suppliers from one to another, in particular, when we talk about manufacturing suppliers, I've been told it can take up to 2 to 3 years. So they prefer not to take risk when there is a problem with one supplier, and they would go for another. But this can only be ensured having 2 approved suppliers when it's a very important medicine for you or for the marketing authorization holder, because this has a huge cost and it takes a lot of time to transfer the supplier. So it would only be justified in these cases. And this has consequences for the other VMPs, most frequently those with very old dossiers with a lower return of investment. So these products are more at risk of shortage. And in our opinion, not so many efforts are being made to reassure that these products will not be at shortage risk. This brings us back to the question if additional guidance for the prevention of management of shortages on the vet would be appropriate. I keep talking about that in the presentation, but in our view, clearly not, because it brings in increasing increasing compliance requirement. It could be very difficult to justify when we are not in an alarming situation to add for a sector that is currently under a lot of regulatory pressure another burden. And we fear that instead of improving the situation, it could even worsen it. The next one, Sylvia, please. So I tried to make the differentiation between availability and shortage in my presentation. So availability is really in the core of regulation 2019/6. And yeah, we think that again, as it was suggested by Nancy, perhaps the aim of increasing the availability of veterinary medicines is not met yet. And from an industry perspective, one of the main reasons is because we have not also reached the lightening of the enormous regulatory administrative burden that the industry is facing at present. Even if there are tools in the regulation that would help us reaching this objective, but there are also some important barriers that further add on the cost and resources needed to keep the products on the market. And some of these examples were given at the Info Day a couple of weeks ago. So if you attended, so the persistence of the national requirements and different implementations, etc. This is adding a lot of work at both the regulators and the industry, and also another very visual example is the adaptation to the new QRD templates, which is extremely challenging and resource demanding, also both for regulators and the industry. So these are just examples for which it is very clear that pragmatic approaches are needed. But going to the particularities of generics, we find also some tools in the regulation that may impact the future availability of these specific medicines in Europe. Some we think maybe in a positive and some others in a less of a positive way. So first, the opening of the centralized procedure could be a good incentive for the generic veterinary medicines and bring some good opportunities for the availability of medicines. Just to keep an eye on the final fees that may be approved, that we know are now under discussion, as we have been advised that these fees may not always justify the submission of a centralized procedure for a generic. So that's something that we are looking into now. And secondly, as it is well known, the new exclusivity period or data protection will cause delays in the entry of generics in the market. So that's, of course, from a generic perspective, it will not help in the availability of generic medicines. The next one, please, Sylvia. So just a couple of slides on the suggestions for moving forward. So first and the most critical for the industry is to avoid any unnecessary burden and additional reporting requirements. In this regard, we do not support the establishment of specific guidance at the veterinary level because of the additional burden that at the moment we are suffering in our industry. We are completely overwhelmed with the new vet medicines regulation and the burden it involves at present, hoping it will decrease, but we are not there yet. Additional guidance would demand a lot of resources, not justified at the moment, in our view, and this may not help improving the situation, but on the contrary, may even worse. So the main message I wanted to give here is please do not make more guidance. Do not put further hurdles on marketing authorization holders, but on the contrary, do help them so that they are able to keep the products on the market. There are some areas also where we think we could definitely work. One is at enhancing the collaboration among all the concerned parties. I think this will be a common a point of understanding from all of us here today to better understand where the problems are and the causes. For this, we need to streamline and set up more efficient communication channels and tools. And we talked about the UPD. So I think we will come back to that. So I will not repeat on that. And the opportunities given on the public portal, but namely to say, why don't we see how this works and how useful this can be for pets in the future? I personally think it is plenty of good opportunities in the discussions we are having today. And we could also think of establishing standardized protocols for the collection of information from vets from the field, and also including provisions for a more agile handling of cases by the industry. And the list of essential veterinary medicines that we have touched upon already, where more care is needed. I am reflecting also on the fact where we said that marketing authorization holders may be already putting some specific effort in some critical medicines. So if you, the vets, think there are critical medicines and we, the industry, are working on critical medicines, maybe it's good that we cross-check that we are making the efforts on the products that it's really needed. And my last slide, thank you, Sylvia, is also one suggestion. So we will talk also certainly on the giving guarantees for flexible and agile regulatory framework for urgent situations. In particular, what is very welcome is the establishment of pragmatic approaches for the change of suppliers when there are emergencies that may lead to shortages. The active listening to industry in punctual situations, like, for instance, we have a very positive example with the extension of the Commission Brexit amendment for the Northern Ireland. So when there is a need, we are heard and yeah, like exceptional decisions are being made. This is also very helpful. And last but not least, we would like to make a plea that in general, any measures applied at the human medicine side to alleviate the pressure and to prevent shortages should also have an immediate and equal application to veterinary medicines too, under the premise that medicines as a whole, human or veterinary, are essential goods for society. And with this, I am done with a note of thanks, and I hope this was useful for you to understand also a little bit better how things work and our perspective. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Elsa. No, certainly very good overview and very good position taken by the industry. I've been scoring a few things. I think you support also the FEE in trying to establish a list of critical VMPs that where the focus should be. Regulatory flexibility, but it's not a surprise that the industry would go for that. Interesting to hear you say that you don't need more guidance or you don't want more guidance, because if the guidance in and by itself becomes a burden to industry, then we as regulators should not produce that guidance. And I think it's more or less aligned with the best practice guide that Rick also commented upon in the plenary session, where that may create a burden if we have to follow what they do on the human side. On the other hand, what you are asking is all measures applied on the human side should be applied on the veterinary side. So, wel de lusten, niet de lasten, to say it in good Dutch. So you want to have all the benefits, but not necessarily the burden of.
Yeah, well, clearly what we want is to ensure the distribution of medicines and getting to the vets. So we had during the COVID, I think a learning phase was that, yes, flexibility was given to human medicines, but we were always like last heard. We also need these measures for variations at the veterinary side. Human medicines were declared essential goods very quickly and the green lines established, but veterinary had to go. So it is always like, it is an essential good for the One Health purposes, first of all, but for all the purposes of animal well-being and everything. So that's the final goal.
I've taken note of that one. VMP should be seen as essential goods and services, and I think that's an important one if we want to come up with recommendations from this session. So, but this is just a few first remarks. Any questions for Elsa in the room? If not online, I see none. Then thank you again, Elsa, and I would like to give the floor to Rick. Rick, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the previous speakers for their presentations. Obviously, coming third, there will be some points that will have already been covered, but I hope it's still useful to see these points perhaps presented in a different form of words. What I'd like to say from the outset is that we do have a very strong desire to support FVE on this issue. The vets at the end of the day are our customers. And obviously what I present here will be strongly aligned with what Elsa has just presented. So if we can move on. In fact, let's skip this. There's a mistake on the bottom of that slide, which we can move on before anybody notices it. But I want to start with what has been quite a common theme already, and that is the need to better understand the situation. I think Ivo introduced this breakout session with this theme. If we ask our members whether there are any major issues, and as Elsa said, we did this a couple of times during the pandemic, and we did not get any issues reported back on manufacturing problems. Some did note that they do see an increased lead time from suppliers of raw materials in particular, but they can manage that. The manufacturing can be adapted, so it's not producing any lasting issues. But we do hear that there are shortages in the marketplace. Some of the member states report that. We've seen the databases that Nancy has presented. And I'm aware of a report that was produced by ANSYS where they put this into numbers for an annual summary, and they talk about 101 disruptions in supply in 2022, which it sounds very important. So we really want to know what exactly is behind that. And I admit I have not read the report, so I apologize for that. But we need to define precisely what these disruptions are. If they are stopped commercialization is within that definition, then that could make quite a big difference in how we interpret that number, for example. And then through the survey from FVE, which is very useful, I think it gives us a really good starting point to look at this problem. We do have reports of shortages. We've already had the discussion around shortages versus availability, and that one local supplier reporting a shortage doesn't mean there's a widespread shortage. But I've taken note of Nancy's reply to my cheeky question, and these were not replies from individual vets, they were replies from the your national members. So that's already good clarification. Thank you. So if we move on. Yes, so the bottom line, Ivo said at the start of this session, is we need to know the true extent and the severity of the problem. Next slide, please. And the other thing we really need to get a handle on are the causes. And here, all stakeholders need to get involved to collaborate in defining the problem. We can build on FEE's good start, but we need to be very careful about our definitions and the question we ask to make sure we get the clear replies, because shortage issues can be caused by a number of reasons, like regulatory, the market demand, or manufacturing issues. And we did note that in the databases that we've had little glimpses of, and I did go and have a look at the Belgian one, Nancy, after you suggested it to me. And the main reason is stopped commercialization, which of course is an availability issue. So next. So again, the bottom line is we need better data and problem definition before we decide on what the real issues and possible actions are. And the next slide, please. So after talking to our members in preparation for this session, we have tried to build a list of what are the known reasons causing shortages. And you'll see I'm presenting three groups really on this slide: some regulatory issues, market demand issues, and then manufacturing and supply chain issues. So on the first two in purple, these are the regulatory ones. And I think Elsa covered this quite well. There is increased regulatory pressure and cost of compliance. But also we get challenges from quite short timelines for implementation of changes. I do think this is that the time needed to implement changes is frequently underestimated. The Commission, for example, was very proud that we had 5 years to implement the QRD9 packaging changes, but I think even that we will find is an underestimation of the time needed, particularly for the larger companies. So there's quite a strong chance that the QRD9 packaging updates could well lead to some temporary shortages around that 5-year deadline. The market demands I won't cover, they are obvious. I've already mentioned increased lead times in the supply chain, but that can be managed. Then, of course, we have manufacturing issues which can cause a shortage, a batch failure or something happening in the manufacturing plant that stops production temporarily. And then there can be problems in reagent supply, raw material supply. And the example I've given here is that during the pandemic, a lot of things were diverted to human medicine sector, even manufacturing things like tubing, for example, which can cause implications then on a veterinary manufacturing site if those materials cannot be obtained. Next. So the bottom line here is that if you look at that list, we can predict and manage some of those. Some we can't, and we do think some could be avoided. Next slide, please. This slide covers some of the increasing pressures on marketing authorizations and the increasing costs. We are quite impacted by what we call horizontal legislation. A lot of these arising from, Green Deal or zero waste or chemical sustainability strategies, this type of thing, which is impacted on our labeling, or a substance may get questioned from a safety perspective, like the PFAS or the titanium dioxide, and this can have a major impact on availability of products. So we do see the REACH activities as something we need to monitor very closely, and argue our case if we think the benefit risk of that of their thinking is needs explaining to them, because of course they only look mainly at the hazard of a chemical. We've seen a lot of impact on packaging costs, which again could lead to rationalization decisions of whether you keep a product on the market or not, or maybe not just a product, but just the full range of pack sizes, for example. And then, of course, we've got the increased fees, which again may lead to some rationalization of small products. Next slide, please. So a lot of these things lead to an availability issue, not necessarily a shortage issue, because the products may not reach the market or may be withdrawn. So the bottom line here, as I think everybody has said, is the availability is the bigger issue, and that's likely to get worse. So a couple of comments now on what should be done and what should not be done. And I've got 2 slides on shoulds and only 1 slide on nots, which I think is a turnaround for an industry presentation. So what should be done? Improved collaboration and communication. I think that goes without saying. The industry has offered, well, I've certainly offered to FVE that we are quite prepared to tackle this on a case-by-case basis, at least as a starting point. We'd prefer to do that rather than go headstrong into putting in more elaborate solutions, because we fear getting into this scenario of developing a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So that's why we'd like to get a much better understanding of the issue and the size of the issue before we move beyond that. So we are prepared to work with FVE and keep the EMA well involved. Obviously, there'll have to be national follow-up, because these are often localized issues. The second point of what should be done is to carry on working on improving the UPD. We've got the minimal viable product, and work is ongoing now to add functionality to that. But I think the main message here, and it's certainly the main message around this I've heard from Nancy, is that it needs to be significantly improved on the public portal side to be more user-friendly for vets, particularly when we look at what's available at the national level. And this, I think, will be quite important for industry, because one of our main themes is we want to just use the UPD and avoid double reporting into national systems as well. So in that sense, we really do need the UPD to be up to scratch, so that Nancy is happy with it, and there's less need for national databases as well. Okay, next slide, please. Point 3, this is another point that Elsa's already mentioned. So continue to class VMPs as essential when there's a crisis, and keep those green lanes open for us as well. Continue to improve the regulatory environment. If there are issues with API supply, then we do need to be able to switch suppliers or add suppliers to the marketing authorization. We need to avoid creating barriers on importing raw materials, and not artificially create temporary shortage situations by some short timeframes for implementing changes, particularly if there isn't a safety reason behind that. And then, of course, the digitalization of data and our IT tools should be able to help us coordinate and collect information, which should be useful for this topic. And then finally, develop a critical list of medicines. We would also support that. So next slide, please. I'm sorry, Sylvie, you're gonna have to keep pressing and just go all the way. There we are. Just a couple of suggestions for what we don't think would be particularly helpful, and that is first one is not to develop a best practice guide for us. Certainly not immediately. Let's see how we do. I did look at the human best practice guide, and I noticed it's actually targeted at retailers and users, so perhaps it's not for the manufacturers anyway. But we would probably want to develop any guidance from a clean sheet of paper to avoid copying and pasting inappropriate things from the human sector, because we are so fundamentally different. We need to define the problem before we start developing new tools anyway. Another thing we are keen to avoid is having additional reporting requirements. As Elsa stressed quite strongly, we do feel we are a bit overloaded at the moment with administrative burden implementing the new regulation. That may well improve in the future, of course, we hope it will. But we're very keen not to move on additional reporting systems now, in this current period when we are all very focused on implementing the regulation. Maybe we can look at that again in the future, but I think overall we would want to avoid additional reporting requirements. Hopefully the availability status or the marketing status system in the UPD will be up and functioning very soon. And as I mentioned previously, we do have a strong desire to avoid duplicate reporting into national systems once the UPD is fully functional. So that's it from me. Thank you for the opportunity to give you the animal health views, and back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Rick. And again, you know, I've listened to list of critical VMPs, regulatory flexibility, no additional reporting, no additional guidance, and I think I can subscribe to most of them. Yeah, and essential VMPs being classified as essential goods and services. So I think we've got, at least until now, pretty much in alignment in that area. I've got a few questions for you. That if, I mean, I can understand why you don't want to see additional reporting, but how can we monitor whether we are actually providing some sort of management to dealing with availability issues if we have no reporting? How would you see that? You know, is it Federation of Veterinarians flagging up to you that we have issues here, and the industry looks for ways on how to alleviate it, or where the problem arises. How do you keep track of? Because it's easy to say, if you're not looking for it, you never have a shortage. If you never pick up the signals, you never have a shortage. So where can we find the balance, Rick?
Yeah, thank you, Ivo. I think that's a very important discussion point. We certainly want to pick up the issues, and I'm hoping by working closely with FVE, we will be able to do that. And I'm not ruling out totally additional reporting requirements, but what I would like to suggest is that we take this in a step-by-step way. Let's first get a clear understanding of the problem. And once we know that, we will know how to better target solutions and the size of the solutions needed. And that would probably also dictate what type of reporting system we might need, or if we need one at all. So I'm not saying never, but I am saying that we've got a lot on our hands at the moment, and we need to with the new regulation, we need to see how that implements and beds in. We need to see how useful we can make the UPD, and once we've done all that, we should be able to decide what level of solutions we need to put in place. So I'm not saying never, Ivo, but let's take it one step at a time.
And then I've got another question, which is, we heard vaccines was flagged up by Nancy as one of the areas where they perceive availability issues in a lot of the responses that have been received in all species, I would say. I've taken note of Elsa that the generics industry is not really involved in that. So yeah, the question logically goes to you. Can you comment on that? Can you comment on the availability of vaccines throughout? Are you aware that there may be availability issues, and what are possible explanations for that? Because is it a supply chain issue, or is it something else?
Yes, I am aware of some availability issues for some vaccines, but I've only heard reports around a couple of vaccines. That's not to say there aren't other issues. It's just that I've only received a couple of reports. So this is where good research around a problem is going to be very, very useful and critical. In the FVE survey, we've already got a good indication of what's happening there, but we need to be clearer about what the issues are behind any shortage in a vaccine. And this is why on one of my slides I said all stakeholders need to work together on researching this problem and understanding the issues. And I'm not quite sure how we can achieve that. I think it needs to start with FVE with perhaps a more precise questionnaire, and then coming back to the manufacturers, and we can investigate what the issues are behind each of these. A lot of information appears to be in some databases, so the ANSYS database looks quite impressive. We can already identify those where there's stopped commercialization, and those where there's an interruption in manufacturing, but we don't know what the reason was for the interruption in manufacturing, and we don't know whether that actually led to a shortage in the field. So we need to expand our knowledge base to really understand what is going on, I think.
Okay, but that could be one of the outcomes of today's meeting, indeed, that we do put that as a priority. We all know how important vaccines are. There is, you have to admit, there's a lot of regulatory incentives to allow veterinary vaccines to come to the market. So I think we need to understand the scale of the problem. So quantifying rather than looking at it in a qualitative way. And then potentially also look at what are root causes and is there anything we can do about this, because this is apparently a serious problem. And if you're aware of it, veterinarians indicated, then can only come to the conclusion, yes, there are availability issues with the vaccine. So there is something in the supply chain or something that has an impact on availability in the market. You don't need to comment, Rick. No, we're looking at you sitting there silent. Any questions for Rick? Yeah, Nancy and then Elsa.
Yeah, just a reflection, because indeed we see in our survey that there's a lot of shortage in different countries. Still, when you ask your marketing authorization holders, they say they don't see real disruptions. Could it be, Rick, that it is because I'm trying to understand how this comes? So maybe this is because we look at the national level and you look at the European level, just trying to understand why this different opinion on the same issue.
Yes, I think there's a good point in there, Nancy. Our information does probably dominate from the international companies. When we've asked for information, we also put the same question out through our national associations, but typically we won't receive much information back through that channel. So I don't think that what industry can't say is that there's not a problem, but what we can say is we haven't got sufficient information at the moment to understand the problem. I'm sorry, that's not a very good answer to your question, Nancy, but I simply do not have the information.
To be continued. Elsa, please.
Thank you, Ivo. Yes, not really a question, but a couple of comments on two topics that we just discussed. First, you were asking about why we are so reluctant to the additional reporting. And I'm just thinking, if now the availability status is to be reported in the UPD on the one hand at package level, and I see with all these national initiatives that probably some of our members are also reporting at national level, how could you add a third level of reporting of availability issues? Because this is already more than a lot. There's double reporting, UPD and national, which shouldn't be the case already. And for the vaccines, just one thought, and I don't have the clue. And as I said, I don't even have a lot of experience, as this is not in our core business. But I think that for the contract manufacturers and for some niche products, these are 96, 98% dedicated to human pharma industry and not to veterinary. And with this COVID increase of manufacturing capacity for COVID vaccines, this could be one of the reasons. Well, you had this because I talked to some colleagues that are in the veterinary practice and they told me that's what they heard. So that's probably, but not only for this specific component, but for some niche components. Sometimes it is easier for the root suppliers to go to the human sector than the vet. We are complicated, we are small, the margins are not the same. So this is probably one cause. Thank you.
Janos.
Thank you, Ivo. Just to comment, just to give feedback from the working group discussions of the task force. The first one is regarding the shortage definition, and I think you raised whether a local issue shouldn't be considered and a shortage, and the definition used by the task force says that the shortage when the supply and the demand doesn't match on national basis. So if there is a local issue, an accident, and the van couldn't deliver the product in time and it caused some local problem, it's not the case for a shortage. And the second one regarding the regulatory burden on the marketing authorizations, and I think you mentioned that variations, and it is also reflected in the draft guideline which are being prepared for the human side. It has 10 recommendations, and one of the recommendations is for the marketing authorization holders and the manufacturers to have a proper quality system, and they explain it nicely. I just can tell you now the main message that the issue has another side as well, that the marketing authorization holders should plan and not to submit a variation in the very last moment. So this is what is mentioned in this draft guideline for the human side. And I also have a question, because now for me it's clear that the industry wouldn't like to have additional guidance, and it is in the task force work plan to check this with the industry, and based on their feedback, the next step will be considered. There is another item in the task force work plan for the veterinary side, and in the work plan it is not mentioned that it should be checked with the industry, but maybe this forum is good for just to get some feedback. So there is an action. The action is the following: for veterinary medicines, analyze the results of the Commission study on human medicines. The Commission made a big study on human product shortages to explore if the root causes of shortages in veterinary medicines are similar, and if actions decided for the human medicines could be adapted for the veterinary medicines, or if a specific veterinary study is necessary. And the indicator for this action is a guidance document reflecting on the similarities and differences and stating the need of a specific vet study. And it has a deadline. It should be done by the end of 2025. And I just would like to get some feedback, if possible, your thoughts. Do you agree with this, or do you think it is not necessary? Just
Yeah, well, I do remember that at the info day, the recent info day, there was a question from industry whether or not we would be restarting the specific vaccine group that was discussing vaccine availability. I think the last report of that, I'm just checking it here, was 2017, a joint EMA HMA veterinary vaccine availability action plan. So it has been on the agenda. It was the CVMP ad hoc group on veterinary vaccines availability. It could be an option that we restart that group again, and that we do indeed invest in, or at least contribute to the study that you are referring to, Janos, or start discussions. Okay, what are we looking at right now? Because I don't think it is the problem of not having the right vaccines. It is indeed, how do we get the right vaccines to the right target species, to the veterinarians, to the animal owners. So there may be different root causes now than there were previously. Previously it was, how do we create incentives to improve vaccine availability and to make sure that the vaccines are being developed and that they are getting to the market. So it is a bit complex. The easy question would be, are the availability issues, are they caused by the same root causes as on the human side? I think the short answer to that is probably not. But then we need to find out what is the issue here. So it's one of those things that we can put on our to-do list as a follow-up of this. Any other questions for Rick at this moment? Yeah, please, Letitia.
Yes, thank you, Ivo. Not directed to Rick and also to Elsa. It's about the double reporting on availability status. We had a discussion at the CMDV level on this question about reporting of availability status in the UPD and also in the national database. And so we had a questionnaire within CMDV. And the general conclusion is that the situation is different in the member states. Some member states do not require that MAHs apply for this reporting in their national databases. They will follow the information stored in the UPD. Others will continue to require this reporting in their national system, either because there are joint agencies and some agencies plan to continue to work as it is done for the human side, and for some it's not clearly clear enough what will be the future. So the double reporting is maybe, but I said just maybe, a temporary position for the reporting of the availability status. So this may evolve in the next months or years. So just for information. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Thanks for that, Letitia. If not, then I would like to hand over to Constance, who will do the second part of the presentations and sharing. Constance, please.
Thank you, Ivo. So now we heard already the veterinarian's perspective and the perspective on industry, and now we'll have two presentations from the regulatory side. And the first one is from our French colleague, from Paul Carnat-Gauthier from the French agency. And well, Paul, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to present today's state of play and how we manage in France shortages. So first of all, I have some slides with qualitative information, and after I will explain how we work for shortages. So if you can move to the third one, thanks. Now in France, we have a declaration of shortages since 2014, and now with the implementation of the new regulation and the evolution of national legislation, we have a mandatory declaration of shortages. So it's not reporting in a database, it's on the case-by-case declaration of each shortage occurred on the French market. And we only request a declaration for what we call effective shortage. So it's when it's the same definition that we already seen. It's only for authorized product and when there is no units of authorized VMPs available in the distribution channel, in the supply channel. So we increased in 2020 and 2022 due to new information and new workshops, and in 2022 the mandatory declaration. So we had in 2022 101 declaration of shortages, so where no units of VMPs available on the market on all the supply chain, and this doesn't mean that there is no alternative. It's a shortage of specific authorized VMP. So if we can move to the next slide, thanks, Sylvia. So as we already said previously, most declarations are for vaccines and antibiotics, and also a lot of other products, but 50% of shortages in France are due to lack of antibiotics and lack of vaccines. We also have information on the origin of shortages. So it's the next slide. And we have a trio, a podium. The first one is any delay in the manufacturing plan, delay in the supply of active substance, delay in manufacturing, delay of subcontractors when they are part of the manufacturing of the finished product. For vaccine, we have two kinds of issues. Manufacturing, it's in case of it's an unavailability of the manufacturing lines. In fact, they are overhauled for production of vaccines, and when we have a specific production or a specific need, it's older vaccines that are not produced. We have also issues on the supply of substance active, just as loss of GMP certificates, export restrictions, and lack of suppliers that was already said by previous speakers. And we have in the third position quality issues, and when it's impact batch release, and this is the second major issue for vaccines. If there is an issue at the batch release, batch control, we have to wait several weeks before a new batch could be released. So this has a huge impact on vaccine availability, vaccine shortages. We also follow what we call critical shortages. So it's not linked to, it's the next slide, it's not linked to a critical list of products. We haven't any list of critical products in France. What we call a critical shortage is when we have a potential impact for public health or animal health. And one of the most important cases when we have no alternative to the product. So we have also an increase in 2022. It's linked to critical shortage of vaccines in the past 2 years. So this is the information we publish on our website. We publish only information on critical shortages. So we have seen that we have 101 declaration for 2022, but we only publish information for 27. So this is, we have information on the pharmaceutical form of these critical shortages. Most of them are injectable products due to vaccine, which represent 53% of critical shortages. We have also antiparasitics and antibiotics in this category of injectable products. So it's the same information that we already have from veterinarians and industry. So how we manage this in France? So we started in 2014, I said, and we have an important working group in October 2017. Sorry for the French word. And we have just as today a multi-stakeholder working group with veterinarians, wholesaler, and industry representatives. And we start a pilot phase with a document we called as good practice. In this document, we defined what is the shortages, what is the critical VMP shortages, and the role of each actors. So regulatory agency, pharmaceutical companies, wholesale distributors, and veterinarians. And at the end of this pilot phase, we have a retext in 2021, and now we move to a legal obligation in our new national legislation in 2022. So we request the declaration of effective and potential shortage by manufacturing authorization holder through an online application. We assess this information, and during the assessment, we used each part of the market for each product. So when we look for alternatives, we always ask which part of the market these products represent, and if it's possible for the marketing authorization holder to increase the units of products available on the market. So when we put an alternative on our website, we have already done this assessment. We can also provide alternative with products authorized in other countries. And as I said, we only publish critical shortage information on critical shortages. It's not a database published on our website. It's only information for each case. It's on a case-by-case analysis. So my last slide, it's how we can find alternatives. So we use the cascade system. So use of VMPs authorized in other member states. We can import for foreign countries. So for these two kinds of use, each veterinarian shall request an import authorization to the agency. So we work with veterinarian associations to have some kind of template for this import request. But we can also use Article 116 of the regulation and grant a temporary exceptional use for unauthorized products. And this is granted to an industry, a marketing authorization holder, even if it's not for an authorized product, but it's for industry, a company, and this is available for the whole country. We also can handle exceptions for batch release when we have a batch release out of specification and there is no health impact. We can accept and release the batch from our side and not from the qualified person side. We can have extension of preemption. We use this for vaccines when they are not available. We also use this for some in vivo diagnostics, like for tuberculin or brucellins. We can have extension of preemption date of the batch. We also have exception of for CP certificates from UDQM in very, very specific cases. And we already shown this we publish on our website the critical shortages. We inform on possible alternatives, and we have also monthly newsletters sent to subscribers, veterinarian, industry, wholesaler who want to have this information, and we send information of new products on the market, shortages, major variation of products, and this is sent every month. So I don't know if you have any question.
Thank you, Paul. And I have two little questions. The first one is, you said a critical shortage is if there's no units of VMPs in the distribution channel anymore, and if it's a risk for public or animal health. But you do not have a list of critical VMPs. So how do you then just decide if this is critical or not? What has an impact on public or animal health?
So we have an SOP, and it's done during the assessment. And if there is no alternative, if it's a zoonotic disease, if there are many criteria to define if the shortage is critical. It could be critical even if we have alternative, but the product represents 80% of the market, for example. We have this for equine disease, equine vaccines, for example. So it's done during the assessment, and we have criteria.
So the VMP has to be for about 80%, or has to be an impact of 80%?
It depends. It depends on the disease. It depends. It's
Okay, so you just decide in a case by case.
yes, it's
basis.
during the
Okay.
assessment.
It's very interesting. Thank you. And the second question is, or maybe a statement. Could it be that you said you now have a legal basis for reporting shortages since 2021? Would it be that your that you have more reports now than 2021 is because of your new legal basis? Because you said it was 83 reported shortages in 21 and 101 in.
Yes, we think the legal obligation increase.
So that's the,
Yes,
so
in fact, when I put my timeline in my slide 9, you can see that we start with very little, very few declaration, and we have an increase with each step. We have the pilot phase, so we start very slowly, and after in 2021 we have a new workshop with a retext of what happened, and this increase the declaration. Now with the legal obligation, I think we are full of declaration, and we don't need more. I insist that it's when there is no unit available in the supply chain. It's not if a wholesaler said, I can have this product, you have to wait next week for the vet. This is not shortage. Shortage when we have no units available from the manufacturers to the veterinarian, to the animal owner. So we have no more than 101.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification, but it just makes it a bit more difficult to see, is this increase due to worsening of the situation, or is it mixed with the increase through the legal changes?
Oh, it's mostly due to the legal changes, because now we also request potential shortages if there is an issue in the manufacturing line or something. We request the manufacturing authorization holder to pre-declare or to declare this, but we are not acting very shortly, but we request this also. So it's new, and I think we receive many declarations. We could see next year how this evolve, but I think we are at the top.
Sounds quite it, and I have the German numbers in my head, so probably it's quite a good development. So this, are there any questions to Paul? Oh, yes, please.
Thank you. I'm very much interested in this idea of publishing alternatives when there is an availability problem, and connecting to the idea of interchangeability of a generic. Do you explore when there is an availability problem if there are generic alternatives, and the production capacity of these generic companies, because most of them are based in Europe, so probably with a capacity to react rather quickly to an availability problem?
Yes, during the assessment, we have a look to all product authorized. We have no reason to regard if to make a difference if they are reference products or generic products. But your question is more perhaps for how we manage therapeutic gaps. And when we have therapeutic gaps, this is when the product is not authorized in France. We can look for product in other countries and request the marketing authority. It's not a request, it's not a formal request, it's an exchange with the manufacturing authorization holder to come to France with a mutual recognition or something like this. And in this case, we also have exchange with generic marketing authorization holders.
Yes, Nancy, please.
Well, just to say, I have a great system. It's more a comment because we will hear here from France and we will hear from Germany. Both countries have a lot of products on the market. It would have been very useful also to have heard from a small country that have not a lot of products on the market, because in that case they will have not a lot of alternative products on their authorized in their country, and I see there from our survey, there is the biggest problem, really.
Okay, Ramiro, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi, hello, good afternoon. I want to thank Paul for the presentation. I have no question, but I have some information to give to the colleagues. The first one is that we agree with the interpretation of the shortages that Paul has explained. We consider shortages where clearly the product is not in the market for some period of time. So there are no units on the market to attend the necessities of the veterinarians. The second information is that we also have the legal obligation for marketing authorization holders to notify the shortages. We have seen in the last year or in the last month an increase in notification of shortages. I have to recognize that sometimes we receive information not from the marketing authorization holders, but from healthcare professionals informing that probably there is a shortages that we have to confirm with the corresponding marketing authorization holders. And in the majority of cases, there are real shortages that has not been notified by the marketing authorization holders, but we have obtained this information by healthcare professionals. And finally, to inform that we also prepare a quarterly bulletin with the most relevant information about new veterinary medicinal products that have been authorized and with the more relevant variation of products. Unfortunately, we don't include in this quarterly bulletin any information about shortages. Probably we have to have in mind for future if it is important to include this kind of information. That's all. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting information that you have the legal obligation now as well. And any other questions? Rick, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paula, for very interesting information and, well, very useful information as well. I also had a question around the definition of effective shortage, which is no units of the product available in the distribution channel, which seems like a very good definition. But I was wondering, how do you establish that there's no units in the distribution channel? That must be quite difficult to actually establish. So I'm wondering how you do it.
The marketing authorization holder have the obligation to declare when a product is no longer manufactured if they stop the production or they have an issue for batch release or something. So they have to declare when there is no product, when they can't put the product on the market, no longer put the product on the market, new batches of the product. And as Ramiro just explained, we also have received information from veterinarians when we can't find a product. And in this case, we request marketing authorization holder to explain why the product is not available. And sometimes it's not a real shortage, it's an unavailability of the product at the wholesaler level, but mostly we can find new shortages with declaration of veterinarians. So in all cases, we request marketing authorization holder to explain what happened.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful and a lot clearer. I had misunderstood your statement on the slide to mean that you established that there's no products anywhere in the distribution channel. But what I understand now is that there's no new batches entering the market. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, you've got to give me the floor because you're chairing. No, I would, listening to Nancy's question on indeed the smaller member states and how they monitor shortages. I do know that we have some people online from shorter member states. I'm not sure whether they can comment on that. Obviously, they don't have a full presentation. The reason why we invited Germany and France is that we knew that they had systems in place, or at least were monitoring, and wanted to give them as examples. So it's nothing to do with trying to exclude the short, because we know that there's several thousand products on the market in France, and that, you know, maybe missing 101 products does not necessarily create a critical situation. If you only have 100, then missing 100, then that would create a critical. So I'm not sure if anyone online would like to comment on their situation, on whether they have monitoring in place. There's an open invitation. If not, then back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ivo. So, and now we're coming to the last.
Rick.
Yeah, I do apologize. I know you want to move on to the next presentation, but I have a follow-up question to Paula, following the clarity on her definition of effective shortage. So it's no new batches entering the distribution channel, but how do you know that actually leads to a shortage? It's an interruption of supply by the manufacturer, but it doesn't necessarily translate into the veterinarians not having access to the product if there's sufficient product already in the distribution channel.
Yes, this definition for effective shortages it's for avoid any declaration of only wholesale unavailability at wholesaler level. We have to marketing authorization holder have to declare shortages when they know that there is no product available on the market for a long time, and that they are not going to cover the needs of our country. You have this in the regulation. You have to provide just you explain this in the very first presentation to cover the topic. You have a marketing authorization holder have to provide continuous. I don't remember the exact term. It's continuous and appropriate. Ensure appropriate and continuous supply of the product. So when the marketing authorization holder knows that due to manufacturing issues, due to whatever, he knows that this is going to be interrupted, he shall declare this to the agency.
Thank you. That's a very useful answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one sentence. There is a CHMP CVMP guideline available on the assessment of the criticality of products. The two main point that should be considered is the therapeutic use and availability of alternatives. But it's from 2016, before the COVID issue, so it's a joint. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now, finally, if there are no further questions online, I would hand over to my colleague Inke, giving a presentation of the situation in Germany. And the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Maybe a short explanation ahead. I'm from the BVL, and the BVL is only responsible for veterinary medicinal products, not for vaccines. So the situation in Germany is for the vaccines the same, but I can't go into detail on that sector. Sorry for that. So I think I can make it very short. You can skip that one. Next one, please. And I think we can leave that one out too. We've talked about it. So the problem in Germany actually is that we don't have a legal obligation for reporting shortages. And well, because we wanted to know a little bit about it, we started with the pandemic in 2020, a voluntary call for reporting well, our hope actually was to get the information out of the UPD, but after having seen the UPD nowadays, I must admit the UPD is not an instrument for the information we want to get. So next slide, please. In 2020, we sent a letter to 50 German companies and associations, industry associations, asking for reporting shortages, and we got 16 answers. And some of these answers were all that they did not experience shortages. So one can think there is no problem in the veterinary sector. But we got one feedback from a wholesaler, and this wholesaler told us that there were about 70 VMPs that were not possible to purchase for him. So maybe there is a problem, but I must admit, even if we are a big country, we don't know. And it seems that the voluntary reporting doesn't work. Next slide, please. We still have a reporting template on our homepage. It's permanently there, but after this letter, we got some reports, but it's getting less and less. And with the new legislation, we hardly get any anymore. The last report actually we got in 2022 was about the Spock system. And that was an MRH who asked for a rapid processing of a variation. So it had a reason why he was reporting. Understandable. On the other hand, if you talk to vets on a private basis, a lot of them tell you they have problems getting vaccines or special veterinary products like ointments for horses, as an example I got. For the small animal practitioners, it's sometimes antibiotics, amoxicillin. But that is anecdotal, and for a national competent authority, what shall we do with this information? It's really difficult. So next slide, please. So our plan is actually to get a legal basis for reporting shortages, and that we can't do by ourselves. We have asked our ministry if they will support that approach. And my vision is that we have then a register to, especially for the veterinarians, that makes life easier for them, I think, and maybe a little bit also for the supervisory authorities if they control vets. And my vision, what I would like most, but I don't think that is a short-term goal is if we have some kind of database, a European database where you can look up all these things, that would avoid double reporting. But I think for a short or middle term, I would like to have a national obligation to report shortages. Not as excessive as in the human sector, I think, but to get some knowledge about the situation in Germany, I don't see another solution. So next slide, please. I think that was it.
Yeah, thank you, Inke, for this brief feedback. And I think now we have the two different polls at the table, with France having increase in reporting after implementing a legal obligation, and in our case, just having 3 reports in 1 year. So obviously, reporting on a voluntary basis does not really work, at least in Germany, let's say it this way. Ivo.
No, I was going to say that as well. That there's a clear difference between the French approach and the German approach, and it at least the French approach, which it generates information, it allows you to report, it comes up with proposals for the alternative. So voluntary reporting probably is not the best way to go. Which brings me back to what we discussed earlier, which is, we need to have some sort of reporting if we want to analyze what is the scale of the problem. Veterinarians could be a very good source of reporting on actual shortages that they experience, but even then, to make that quantitative rather than just qualitative, we need to do some work. I want to, we did some work on, because the UPD has been mentioned several times, we did some thinking on, could we develop something not in the short term, because it's depending on indeed data input that we are already collecting, and data quality. But could we think of something that could help us in analyzing shortages, and also in measuring whether what we are doing really improves that situation? And in fact, I think we can. If you look at already data fields that are in there, we have data fields on sales, which are in there. We have data fields on availability. So these two combined already give you some information. In the antimicrobial sales and use collection of data, we will not only collect data on the sales and the use, but also on the population, the standing population of animals, because otherwise you cannot analyze what you are actually looking at. So and this is a gross simplification of what you could do next with it. That once you have those figures on the population data, which by 2030 will include companion animals in a very granular way, dogs, cats, horses, all farmed livestock. So we are collecting all that sort of information to do the analysis on antimicrobial sales and use, and to see how the interventions have an impact on the reduction of antimicrobial sales. But we could use it as well, at least in my mind, if you think about it conceptually, to look at what is the typical consumption of veterinary medicinal products in any given population, maybe regional differences. But if you then see that for example, antibiotics are or vaccines. Let's take vaccines, because vaccination is something that's common practice. You can take into account what the epidemiology of the disease is in a local situation. But if you have a standing population of 100,000 dogs, you would imagine that there is a certain number of vaccines that you would need to do, and looking at canine distemper, parvo vaccine, you have those sales figures for those areas. So by combining the data that we are already collecting and developing the algorithms that could help us, we could say something about availability and about potential shortages, combined possibly with reporting from veterinarians on shortages, or the actual voluntary or mandatory reporting by companies. So this is a vision. It's not going to deliver next year. It's not going to deliver 2 years from now, but it certainly has the potential in the longer run to deliver on tools that we can use. It's certainly one of the things that we have been discussing under the big data strategy, where I feel it would fit, because I totally agree that creating additional mandatory reporting, whether it's for the industry or for anyone else, is not necessarily the key to a solution here, for a number of reasons. Companies will only know about their own supply chain. You still would have to combine numerous, data from different areas to say, is there really a shortage in the market? If one company has a problem, it could be for any reason. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have supply of specific medicinal products into the market anymore. So yes, I would say that there's a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities to come up with potential solutions or potential ways on how we can monitor and how we can manage shortages. Yeah, you're the chair, Constance. You can take the floor at any time. You can just say, "Shut up, Ivo," and then we continue.
Okay, I hesitate to do that a little tiny little bit. Okay, but I thought, yes, that's the shortages and maybe the vision for the UPD. But I wonder, of course, I'm not really an UPD expert, but since it's the availability place where availability is documented, and maybe this could work in the future as well to see if we're with all the withdrawals, because I saw that it's a major problem that we lose products and maybe we could have the system running automatically, indicating we are running in the situation of maybe availability problems for this and this indication, for this and this vaccine, because of products going from the market. So that some system monitors the withdrawals and has this, it sees maybe possibly problems we're running into, but that's just an idea, or some kind of traffic light system or whatever, maybe for the future. But this is just loud thinking without any knowledge.
But I think what we're currently asking as input into the UPD is pure availability. Is a product being marketed? It doesn't tell us anything, or it doesn't give us information about, is there 100,000 packages out there, or is it 10 packages? 10 packages already is available on the market. So, and we're not asking that. We do ask is retrospectively about sales data, and that's a mandatory field, and that can help us, but it cannot help us predict shortages. So for predicting shortages, I think we would need to look at it in a different way. We can monitor trends, but you're right. We would need to have more information there. What is, I think, a real challenge is the double reporting. The double reporting, as we see that some member states are setting up monitoring systems that request mandatory reporting, and others aren't. And as said, we're not. The regulation doesn't tell us that we need to monitor for shortages, so member states can do that in their own territory. But some of the data that they will submit will be overlapping with some of the data that also are being reported in the UPD. And I think we should work on trying to avoid that. Those are challenges that we have ahead of us. We're already 50 minutes beyond the schedule, and so will we try to wrap up the meeting, or questions maybe? Paul, please.
We start late, so we are not so late.
No.
Just to discuss a little about a point was raised. It's about the critical list of VMPs. We have seen a critical VMPs from the vet side, critical VMPs from industry, and I'm not so sure that's the same critical products. And you said, for example, one example, it's not just in mind. You said shortages of rabies vaccine is critical. It's critical. It's a critical VMP. In France, it's not a critical VMP. We are free of rabies. We have no legal vaccination, so it's only for people who wants to travel with their pets. So it's not critical for us. And it's why I insist during my presentation, we are not dealing with critical products, we are dealing with critical situation. So I don't know how we can achieve a critical list of VMPs together, but it's for discussion.
I think it fits with what we said at the very beginning of this meeting, and also Rick in his presentation. It's about analyzing where the shortages are, what is the scale of the shortages, and there may be, well, there will be huge regional differences in terms of needs. So where are the therapeutic gaps in individual member states, as well as actual needs. If there's a non-vaccination program, but vaccination is being carried out in other member states for reasons of public health, then obviously the needs are different. I think the shortages are both, it's both qualitative. Do we have the medicines that we need, as well as quantitative? Do we have enough of the medicines that we need? And honestly, looking at what has been presented today, I don't think we have a clue. At least we cannot quantify it. So brings me back to how are we going to collect that sort of data? That we're not going to resolve that right now. I think we should put it as an action point for discussion and see how we can get those data, because it is important. Nancy.
Just something that Imke said very much echoed with me. You said you didn't get reports from the competent authorities, but you asked the grocery and he could tell you. So maybe that is another party.
Not the competent authorities, but industry.
Yeah, marketing authorization. I'm sorry. But maybe the groceries who distribute products, and many products, they could also help us getting more an idea how big it is, the problem.
Someone needs to do it, Nancy. That's one of the things. I mean, if we want something out of this, we need to organize ourselves and jointly approach this problem to see, okay, what is the data that we need? How are we going to collect the data? It could be through a simple survey, but will it be representative? Will it allow us to quantify the shortage in and by itself? I think a clear message that I've heard today is that there are certain recommendations that can come from today's discussion. There are data gaps where we simply don't know, but the common thing that we see is vaccines and antibiotics, and those we all know that they are extremely important for managing veterinary health. So I think a picture emerges here, but the best recommendation is more work to be done. There's also the recommendation that no, we don't feel that we need to follow the best practice guidance that's on the human side. We don't need more guidance. We first need to understand the problem a bit more. I think that's general agreement, what I sense at least, with people connected online and in the room. But then we should focus on indeed getting a better understanding. So otherwise, it stops here. There's no action, and there's no relief for the problems that the veterinarians may experience in the field. So for me, it would be an excellent outcome of this session if we could agree that a follow-up action is needed, and that the first thing that we would need to do and discussed briefly already on maybe the CVMP ad hoc group on availability of veterinary vaccines could play a role in that as well if we start that group again. It was I think it was also a joint HMA-EMA task force on availability of veterinary vaccines. They could address the vaccine issue. Antibiotics, of course, is a very difficult area overall because there is that aim to reduce the consumption of antibiotics by 2030 by another 50%. So comes time, there won't be any shortages. I think that's the simple way out there. But at this moment, if we are experiencing that there are real shortages, not particularly in farmed livestock, but in the treatment of companion animals, for example, then it needs to be addressed. Paul.
Just in information on antibiotics, we are currently on a project with the World Health Organization, WHO, and we have already received a big report on the antibiotics. It's both for human and vet products. It's a request from the French government on the availability of antibiotics, especially old antibiotics. And now we received the report. We had a conference in France at the end of January, if I remember well, 26th of January. And now we are planning actions on it's cover all the information we have seen here, how to maintain the product, how to report, and so on. So perhaps for antibiotics we could have something at least with French information, but we've also an open eye on the European level from this project. It's called PARS, P-I-R-S.
No, thank you very much for that. I was just reflecting on antibiotics, antimicrobials in general. To start a project on shortages of antimicrobials may give a wrong signal. Constance, please.
Yes, but we had already the proposal maybe to use the survey from FEE to go, Rick proposed that to go maybe and ask specific questions regarding the shortages of the vaccines, what could be reasons for that. So this was one.
No, they don't know.
Okay, but or at least think about how we could maybe find or retrieve more causes for shortages in the area of vaccines. Okay.
Yeah, veterinarians see the shortage, but in most cases they don't know what is the reason behind it. So that will not help. And for the antibiotics, it's really like Paul also said, the old antibiotics, so tetracyclines, penicillins, amoxicillin. I saw now that on the human field they also have a problem with amoxicillin, so maybe this is related. I don't know, but it's really the old ones, which I think there are probably a lot of marketing authorizations. So and it's not only for companion animals; it is also for livestock.
Barbara?
Not sure it's helpful, but I could go back to the SFAC report because I believe it is something we mentioned in the analysis of the antimicrobial cells data that, for example, in the Nordic countries, the penicillins weren't available and they had to resort to other classes, which is, as mentioned before, an undesirable effect. So we have seen that issue in the sales data.
Yeah, we could take that into account for sure. Laetitia.
Yes, a final word. I don't know if it's appropriate or not. because we have seen that a lot of data is published on the availability issues, shortages by NCAs. We saw the examples in your presentation, Nancy, about Slovenia, France, and other countries, and also Belgium and Denmark. Yes, thanks, Paul. And I don't know if the task force on big data can also take this into account and see what is published, what can be possible to, don't know, to combine, and also to take into account the open data and see if it's possible to prepare something combined with all this kind of information, because we have information on the product in the list, and also we have information in the UPD. I don't know if some IT competent people can mix everything and propose something.
No, thank you. Because good proposal. I'm sure you're all aware, and if not, then I'll give you that information that the shortages page on the EMA website has links to all the national websites where shortages are being reported. I had a look at it yesterday, and information out there is really limited. It is a lot of the member states do not report on shortages or do not have that accessible in the website. So you'll get a very biased view, as we've seen here today as well, a biased view from two big member states that report on systems that do or do not work. And in that sense, that would only be possible if you would go for a pan-European approach. Going there will, I think, at this moment is not what we would like to do. Stimulating that we have a discussion on the shortages, trying to analyze it. That's what we need to do. But we can have a look at it, because if there's overlap in similar products we could easily analyze those data that is out there and get them out. I'll talk to Ilaria. Anyone online? I'm trying to summarize what we've heard. I think we've heard the different stakeholders. This is a multi-stakeholder meeting, so we've heard the different stakeholders present their perspective on shortages and lack of availability of veterinary medicinal products. And certainly there were common messages in there, in the sense that a list of critical VMPs would be really good to develop, even though there may be differences in what is being regarded as a critical VMP or not in different member states. It's certainly something that we would need to work on in order to be able to properly discuss, if there's an availability issue, does it really matter? The communication of shortages, and we've seen examples of how it, both from Nancy's presentation as well as from the individual presentations of the member state, on how it can be communicated. I think we should really see them as examples. And the UPD has been mentioned several times. The UPD could be in due time a vehicle for that. The UPD, and we're working on that, should also be an area where veterinarians can look for alternatives. If they can do a search based on the indications, what they are looking for, it could replace the active messaging that is currently on the French website. Even though I feel that, for reasons of accessibility, if there is a shortage, and if we do report on a shortage, then having the opportunity to then inform veterinarians about what are the alternatives that you could use, obviously is the best system, but it brings manageability issues as well. We have at least discussed in my view whether shortages or availability issues that are being reported are always leading to a big problem in the market. So we've got the side from the veterinarians. Rick's question on if something has been reported as not being available for 1 month or 2 months, does it really lead? So if that report comes from a marketing authorization holder, there's a supply issue, does it really lead to a problem in the market? It doesn't necessarily need to be. So we need to be aware of that. we heard a lot about what I would call, let's say, qualitative issues, antibiotics, vaccines. We're lacking quantitative data, and I think this is certainly an area that we should look into. Regulatory flexibility has been discussed. Regulatory flexibility basically based on the fact, and I think that's an important one to say, that veterinary medicinal products should be regarded as essential goods and services. That would imply that the supply of veterinary of these essential goods and services would continue under any circumstances, even crisis situations, and that the same conditions should apply as there are for the human medicinal products and those that are on the list of critical human medicinal products and the list of critical VMPs should be treated in the same way. We did discuss some sort of reporting that should be in place because without reporting, how do we know about the issues and how do we keep track of what we're doing? The interventions that we're doing is really going to deliver something. Clear message that we don't need additional guidance. Clear message that the best practice guide that we should not currently try to follow that on the veterinary side until we understand the full scale of the problem. I think that a very high level is what I took from today. France provided a very good example of monitoring, and but also that if they go for mandatory reporting, that they may find more or identify more shortages than before. So the problem may be bigger than we anticipate. I mean, when we started this, the response was no, there is no shortages except from the veterinarians that experience that they have no access to certain products. I think we've got an issue here that we need to invest in the multi-stakeholder way, as we've been addressing it today. I think we've got a very good discussion today. Would like to thank all the speakers for excellent contributions and really driving the discussions. We didn't follow the schedule of the program exactly, but nevertheless, I think it was good meeting. Anyone? Yeah, any remarks? Rick, shall I give you the last word or Thomas?
The only last word I'd have is to thank you for an excellent summary, Ivo, and it has been good discussions, and I think it's been very important to get us all together to discuss this. This is a multi-stakeholder topic, which can't be solved without all stakeholders getting involved. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rick. And as I said, we'll draft a few slides. Janos will present it tomorrow in the plenary session. And I think Nancy, you at this point, I will also give a presentation in the plenary session as well on how vets experience the shortages is a problem. So in the room, anyone? If not, then I move to my instructions again, which is, I did to wrap up. I would like to remind you all to join in the plenary room or on the WebEx link tomorrow at 9 o'clock, because that's when we will continue this meeting. And see you there, basically. Thanks a lot. And have an enjoyable evening, all of you.